within Asia or within the world, which countries do you think are likely to be able to emulate the kinds of successes that we've seen in Taiwan?
Well, I've seen like countries like Singapore, Korea have been tremendously successful.
Yeah.
Right? Korea, I remember back in the 60s and 70s, Korea was nowhere to be found.
They were nowhere,
right?
Yeah.
And then later on, they have kind of Me Too type products.
Right.
And we associate those kinds of products.
You usually start out with Me Too's.
Yeah,
then you start
with Me
being
Too's.
innovative and unique.
Exactly.
Right.
And then slowly they climb up the learning curve. And I remember years ago, we see Samsung say, what the heck is this?
Yeah.
You know,
well, now it's
non-reliable. Now it's the best thing in the world. So these countries have done quite well.
What about China?
China is, I don't think we could ignore their capability. They have, let me talk about something that I'm familiar with, just research.
Right.
I'm academia, I know research. Years ago, we have technical conferences and we see papers from China and say, forget it. Just quality is so bad. It's not even competitive.
No, it's very different.
Now, that was probably in the 80s and the 90s. Now, they're better than us. They're better than us. If you look at, papers, publications, data from key conferences in the chips business. For example, in the International Electronic Devices Meeting, which is a device technology conference, the biggest one in our field. International Solid-State Circuits Conference, the Circuits and System Conference in our field, the two biggest conferences in our field. You basically flipped. Years ago, the U.S. had the majority of the papers. I remember there were roughly about 40 to 50% of the papers from the U.S. And China, maybe 20, 30 years ago, there were nowhere to be found. Today, China and Asia, the papers are more than 40%, almost close to 50%.
Oh my gosh.
And the U.S. has steadily declined from 40, 50% to 30 to 40%. And the rest of the world, principally Europe and Japan, has basically fallen off the cliff. So the research and development, the research capability in Asian countries, China, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and so on, have really become the strongest region in terms of producing good quality research. I'm not just talking about quantity, it's quality. And the only thing that I see that the U.S. is still a little bit ahead is in coming up with the new ideas. What the Chinese always say, going from 0 to 1. Namely, starting from nowhere, nothing, and come up with this really new idea. And if I look at what I would call new idea that is not been discussed before, the U.S. still, if you read the research papers, the U.S. still is the principal place where these new ideas come from. But once these new ideas become known, then
you see mushrooming of this new ideas in other places.
Exactly. And I feel it in my everyday research with my students.
Oh my gosh.
Any new ideas that we come up with, once they become known, this is a good idea.
The next week it will show up in China.
It will show up in China. Not only that, they do it better than you.
Yeah.
I cannot compete anymore. They have better resources. They have more students. They have more funding from the government. I cannot compete anymore. I have to get out of that field.